September 14, 1944, Otopeni Airfield, 20 kilometers north of Bucharest. The morning mist clung to the Romanian countryside as Captain Alexandru Popescu watched American transport planes lumber across the tarmac, their massive propellers cutting through the humid air. The metal drums they unloaded gleamed like silver promises in the early sunlight, each one containing 100 gallons of aviation fuel that would change everything the Romanian pilot thought he knew about aerial warfare. What Popescu and his squadron mates believed would be just another routine fuel delivery would instead reveal one of the most closely guarded secrets of Allied technological superiority. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What these Romanian aviators were about to discover would fundamentally transform their understanding of why German aircraft had been mysteriously underperforming throughout the latter stages of the conflict, and why Allied engines seemed to possess an almost supernatural endurance that defied all conventional engineering wisdom. Captain Popescu adjusted his leather flying gloves as he approached the American fuel depot, his boots crunching against the gravel runway that had been hastily extended to accommodate the larger Allied aircraft. Just 3 weeks earlier, Romania had dramatically switched allegiances from the German alliance to the Allied cause, a political earthquake that left pilots like Popescu navigating not just new flight patterns, but entirely new realities of warfare technology. Standing beside the fuel drums was Technical Sergeant Robert Chen, a Chinese-American fuel specialist from the Army Air Forces who had arrived with the supply convoy. Chen carried a worn leather notebook filled with octane ratings, chemical formulations, and performance data that represented years of American industrial research and development. "Captain Popescu," Chen said in careful English, extending his hand in greeting, "I understand your squadron has been flying German-supplied aircraft with German fuel specifications." "That is correct, Sergeant," Popescu replied, his English heavily accented but precise. "Messerschmitt Bf 109G variants, primarily. We have been using fuel provided by German supply lines since 1941. Chen nodded thoughtfully, making notes in his ledger. "What octane rating were you typically receiving from German sources?" Popescu paused, consulting his own flight manual. 87 octane, standard aviation fuel. Sometimes we received B4 fuel with additional performance additives, but supplies have been inconsistent for many months. The American sergeant's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Captain, what I'm about to show you might explain some performance issues you've been experiencing with your engines." Chen led Popescu to a metal testing station that had been set up near the fuel depot. The equipment looked sophisticated, beyond anything the Romanian pilot had seen in 3 years of wartime service. Precision measuring devices, chemical analysis equipment, and temperature monitoring systems that seemed almost impossibly advanced. "This fuel," Chen said, tapping one of the American drums, "is 130 octane. It's been specially formulated at refineries in Texas and California using cracking processes and additive compounds that increase engine performance by approximately 30 to 40% over standard aviation fuel." Popescu stared at the numbers Chen had written in his notebook. The difference seemed impossible, almost too dramatic to believe. "Sergeant Chen," Popescu said slowly, "are you suggesting that American aircraft have been operating with fuel nearly 50% more powerful than what we have been using?" "Not just American aircraft, Captain. British, Free French, Soviet aircraft receiving Lend-Lease supplies. Essentially every Allied air force has had access to high-octane fuel since mid-1942. The production capacity of American refineries has allowed us to supply this grade of fuel across multiple theaters of operation." As Chen spoke, another Romanian pilot approached their conversation. Lieutenant Gheorghe Ionescu had been flying combat missions since the beginning of Romanian involvement in the conflict and possessed an almost intuitive understanding of aircraft performance characteristics. "Captain Popescu," Ionescu interrupted, "I could not help but overhear this discussion about fuel grades. I've been wondering about something for many months now." "What is that?" "Lieutenant, during our missions supporting German operations against Soviet forces, I noticed that captured Soviet aircraft seemed to maintain engine performance at altitudes where our German-supplied engines would begin to lose power and overheat. I assumed it was due to different engine designs, but now I'm beginning to suspect otherwise. Chen looked up from his notebook with sudden interest. Lieutenant, can you describe these performance differences more specifically? Ionescu pulled out his own flight log, pages worn from constant use and filled with meticulous notations. At altitudes above 25,000 feet, our Messerschmitt engines would begin showing signs of reduced performance after approximately 45 minutes of combat maneuvering. The engines would run hot, power output would decrease, and we would be forced to reduce throttle settings to prevent damage. Meanwhile, Ionescu continued, Soviet aircraft operating at similar altitudes seemed capable of maintaining full power output for extended periods without the same performance degradation. Chen made rapid notes as the Romanian pilot spoke. What you're describing, Lieutenant, is exactly what we would expect to see when comparing aircraft running on 87-octane fuel versus 130-octane fuel under high-stress conditions. Chen walked over to a large chart that had been mounted near the fuel depot, covered with technical specifications and performance graphs. Let me show you something that might interest both of you. The chart displayed engine performance data, comparing various fuel grades across different operating conditions. The differences were stark and undeniable. When an aircraft engine operates on higher octane fuel, Chen explained, it can maintain higher compression ratios without experiencing engine knock or detonation. This means the engine can produce more power while running cooler and more efficiently. Popescu studied the chart intently. Sergeant, this suggests that German aircraft have been operating at a significant disadvantage throughout much of the conflict. That's correct, Captain. German fuel production has been limited by both resource constraints and refinery capacity. They've been unable to produce high-octane aviation fuel in quantity sufficient to supply their entire air force. At that moment, a third voice joined their conversation. Major Heinrich Weber, a German engineer who had been captured during the recent Romanian change of allegiance, had been assigned to work with Allied technical specialists to provide intelligence about German military capabilities. Gentlemen, Weber said in excellent English, I could not help but overhear your discussion about fuel specifications. As someone who worked directly with aircraft engine development for the German forces, I can provide some additional context to what Sergeant Chen has been explaining. Weber approached the chart Chen had been displaying, his expression a mixture of professional interest and resignation. For the past 18 months, Weber continued, German engineers have been aware of the superior fuel quality available to Allied forces. We have captured samples of American aviation fuel and conducted extensive analysis at our testing facilities. What did your analysis reveal, Major? Chen asked. Exactly what you would expect. The octane ratings, the additive compounds, the performance characteristics. Everything confirmed that American fuel technology was significantly more advanced than our own production capabilities. Weber paused, looking directly at the two Romanian pilots. What we discovered was that American refineries were using catalytic cracking processes and anti-knock compounds that German industry simply could not replicate at the scale required for military operations. Ionescu leaned forward with obvious curiosity. Major Weber, if German engineers knew about this technological gap, why were pilots not informed about the performance limitations? Weber's expression became somber. Lieutenant, military leadership believed that acknowledging the fuel quality disadvantage would damage pilot morale and confidence. Instead, pilots were told that reduced engine performance was due to altitude, weather conditions, or maintenance issues. This means, Popescu said slowly, that German pilots have been flying combat missions without knowing that their aircraft were operating at reduced capability compared to Allied aircraft. That is correct, Captain. And the performance gap became more pronounced as the conflict continued and German fuel quality decreased due to supply line disruptions and resource shortages. Chen opened another section of his notebook, revealing production statistics and supply chain data. The scale of American fuel production might surprise you, Major Weber. As of August 1944, American refineries were producing over 6 million gallons of high-octane aviation fuel per day. Weber studied the numbers with obvious amazement. 6 million gallons daily. Our maximum production capacity at peak efficiency was approximately 400,000 gallons per day, across all German refineries combined. That's a production ratio of 15-1, Ionescu calculated quickly. American fuel production exceeded German production by 15 times. Chen nodded. And that doesn't include the additional production capacity dedicated to supplying Allied forces in other theaters: the Pacific, North Africa, Italy, and the planned operations in Western Europe. As the conversation continued, a Romanian ground crew mechanic named Sergeant Dumitru Petrescu approached the group. Petrescu had 20 years of experience maintaining aircraft engines and possessed an almost encyclopedic knowledge of engine performance characteristics. "Captain Popescu," Petrescu said, saluting respectfully, "I have been listening to this discussion about fuel quality, and I wanted to share something I observed during engine maintenance operations." "What did you observe, Sergeant?" "During the past 6 months, I noticed increasing frequency of engine problems in aircraft returning from missions: overheating, reduced power output, increased wear on engine components, problems that seemed inconsistent with normal operational parameters." Petrescu pulled out a maintenance log that he carried in his toolkit. "I documented engine temperatures, oil pressure readings, and performance metrics for aircraft in our squadron. The data showed a pattern of declining performance that coincided with changes in our fuel supply sources." Chen examined Petrescu's maintenance records with growing interest. "Sergeant, these temperature readings you've recorded are exactly what we would expect to see in engines running on lower-grade fuel under combat stress conditions." "What do you mean, Sergeant Chen?" "When aircraft engines operate on lower-octane fuel, they're forced to run at reduced compression ratios to prevent engine damage. This results in incomplete fuel combustion, which generates excess heat and reduces overall engine efficiency." Weber interjected with additional technical information. "Sergeant Chen is correct. German engines running on standard fuel were operating at approximately 75% of their theoretical maximum performance to prevent catastrophic engine failure." The implications of this revelation began to sink in among the Romanian personnel present. Their aircraft had been operating at reduced capability for months without their knowledge, putting them at a systematic disadvantage in aerial encounters with Allied forces. "Major Weber," Popescu asked, "how many German pilots were aware of these fuel limitations?" "Very few, Captain. Engine performance issues were typically attributed to maintenance problems, pilot error, or environmental conditions. The systematic nature of the fuel quality disadvantage was classified information available only to senior engineering staff and select military leadership." Chen closed his notebook and looked at the assembled group of Romanian and German personnel. "What we're discussing here represents one of the most significant technological advantages enjoyed by Allied forces throughout the conflict, an advantage that was largely invisible to opposing forces until they had direct access to comparative analysis." As the afternoon sun began to cast longer shadows across Otopeni airfield, the conversation shifted toward the practical implications of Romania's access to American fuel supplies. "Sergeant Chen," Ionescu asked, "when Romanian aircraft begin using American fuel, what performance improvements can we realistically expect?" Chen reopened his technical manual to a section dedicated to performance projections. "Based on engine specifications for Messerschmitt Bf 109 aircraft, you should see approximately 35% increase in maximum power output, improved high-altitude performance, reduced engine operating temperatures, and extended engine life." Additionally, Chen continued, "pilots will be able to maintain full throttle settings for longer periods without risking engine damage, which significantly improves combat maneuverability and operational range." Weber added his own technical perspective. "The performance improvement will be particularly noticeable during high-stress maneuvers and extended combat operations. German engines running on standard fuel would begin to lose power after approximately 30 minutes of intensive maneuvering. With American fuel," Weber continued, "the same engines should be capable of maintaining full performance for over an hour under similar conditions. Petrescu looked up from Chen's technical specifications with obvious excitement. This means our maintenance requirements will decrease significantly and aircraft availability will improve accordingly. That's correct, Sergeant, Chen confirmed. Higher quality fuel reduces engine wear, decreases maintenance intervals, and improves overall aircraft reliability. As the technical discussion continued, a larger group of Romanian pilots and ground personnel began to gather around the fuel depot, drawn by word of the dramatic revelations about fuel technology and aircraft performance. Captain Nicolae Radu, the squadron's senior pilot with over 400 combat hours, approached the group with obvious curiosity about the animated technical discussion taking place. "Captain Popescu," Radu said, "I understand there has been some interesting information shared about aircraft fuel specifications." Popescu quickly summarized the key points that had been revealed during the afternoon's conversations. The dramatic differences in fuel quality, the performance advantages enjoyed by Allied aircraft, and the systematic disadvantage that had affected German and German-supplied aircraft throughout the conflict. Radu listened to the summary with growing amazement. "Captain, if what you are describing is accurate, this explains many operational observations that seemed puzzling at the time." "What observations, Captain Radu?" "During missions over Soviet territory, I frequently noticed that Soviet aircraft seemed capable of maintaining pursuit at altitudes where our engines would begin to struggle. I attributed this to superior Soviet pilot training or aircraft modifications, but now I suspect fuel quality was the determining factor." Chen looked up from his notes with interest. "Captain Radu, can you provide specific examples of these performance differences?" Radu consulted his own flight log, filled with detailed mission reports and tactical observations. "During a mission in July 1944, my squadron encountered Soviet aircraft at 28,000 feet altitude. After approximately 20 minutes of maneuvering, my aircraft began experiencing reduced power output and increased engine temperatures. The Soviet aircraft, however, seemed capable of maintaining full performance throughout the engagement, which lasted over 40 minutes. At the time, I assumed they had superior aircraft or exceptional pilots." Weber nodded with recognition. "What you experienced, Captain Radu, was the direct result of fuel quality differences. Soviet aircraft were receiving American Lend-Lease fuel, while your aircraft was operating on German-supplied fuel with significantly lower performance specifications." The revelation seemed to affect Radu profoundly. As a senior pilot who had participated in dozens of combat missions, the knowledge that his aircraft had been systematically disadvantaged challenged many of his assumptions about aerial combat and tactical effectiveness. "Sergeant Chen," Radu asked, "how long has this fuel technology been available to Allied forces?" Chen consulted his historical production records. High-octane aviation fuel production began in earnest in American refineries during 1941. By early 1942, sufficient quantities were available to supply American, British and Soviet air forces operating in multiple theaters. "This means," Radu calculated slowly, "that for over 2 years, German and German Allied aircraft have been operating at reduced capability compared to Allied forces." "That's correct, Captain. The fuel quality advantage has been consistent throughout the majority of active combat operations." As evening approached and the technical discussions began to wind down, the Romanian personnel gathered around the American fuel depot reflected on the broader implications of what they had learned. The revelation about fuel quality represented more than just technical specifications or performance metrics. It illustrated the massive industrial and technological advantages that Allied forces had developed and maintained throughout the conflict. "Sergeant Chen," Popescu asked, "beyond fuel production, what other technological advantages have Allied forces maintained during this conflict?" Chen smiled slightly. "Captain, what we've discussed today about fuel technology represents just one example of American industrial capacity and technological development. Similar advantages exist in aircraft production, radar technology, communication systems, and logistical capabilities. The scale of American industrial production has allowed Allied forces to maintain technological superiority across multiple categories of military equipment simultaneously. Weber added his perspective as a German engineer who had observed these technological gaps from the opposing side. The American approach to wartime production emphasized both quantity and quality in ways that German industry could not match. For example, Weber continued, American aircraft factories were producing over 4,000 aircraft per month by 1944, while German production peaked at approximately 1,500 aircraft monthly. Additionally, American aircraft were incorporating technological improvements at a faster rate than German engineers could develop countermeasures. As the Romanian personnel prepared to return to their quarters for the evening, Chen gathered his technical documentation and prepared to file his report on the fuel distribution operation. "Gentlemen," Chen said, addressing the assembled Romanian pilots and ground crew, "what we've discussed today will remain relevant long after this conflict ends. The technological and industrial capabilities we've examined represent fundamental changes in how modern warfare will be conducted. The nation or alliance with superior industrial capacity and technological development will possess decisive advantages that extend beyond individual battles or campaigns." Popescu shook hands with Chen and Weber, expressing gratitude for the educational discussion that had transformed his understanding of aerial warfare and technological competition. "Sergeant Chen, Major Weber, this has been one of the most enlightening conversations of my military career. The knowledge you have shared will influence how I approach aviation and technology for the rest of my life." As the Romanian squadron began implementing American fuel in their aircraft over the following days, the performance improvements became immediately apparent to pilots and ground crew alike. Aircraft that had struggled to maintain full power during combat maneuvers now operated with smooth, consistent performance even under the most demanding conditions. Engine temperatures remained stable during extended operations, and maintenance requirements decreased dramatically. Most importantly, Romanian pilots discovered they could maintain competitive performance against any aircraft they encountered, knowing that their engines were operating at optimal efficiency rather than reduced capability. The psychological impact of this technological revelation extended far beyond improved aircraft performance. Romanian personnel who had questioned their equipment and training now understood that many of their previous challenges had resulted from systematic technological disadvantages rather than personal or professional shortcomings. 6 months later, as Allied forces consolidated their victory in Europe, Captain Popescu found himself reflecting on that September afternoon at Otopeni airfield, when American fuel drums had revealed the hidden technological war that had been fought alongside the visible military campaigns. The knowledge that fuel quality alone had provided Allied forces with 30 to 40% performance advantages illustrated the critical importance of industrial capacity and technological development in modern warfare. For Romanian pilots who had experienced both sides of this technological divide, the contrast served as a powerful demonstration of how industrial superiority could determine military outcomes even before tactical engagements began. The lessons learned from comparing German fuel limitations with American fuel advantages would influence post-war Romanian aviation development and industrial policy for decades to come, as the nation sought to ensure it would never again face such systematic technological disadvantages. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.